Answer no, we're underway. Good morning, everyone. My name is Doug Routley, and I'm the MLA from Nanaimo North Cowichan and chair of the Special Committee on Reforming the Police Act and all-party committee of the Legislative Assembly. I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining today's meeting from the traditional territories of the Malahat First Nation, and it's an honor to live and work in their territory. I'd like to welcome all those who are listening and participating to this meeting. Our committee is undertaking a broad consultation with respect to policing and related systemic issues in BC. We are taking a phased approach to this work and are meeting with a number of organizations and individuals over the fall to follow up on input we've already received and to learn more about new models and approaches that have been drawn to our attention. For today's meeting, we'll be having follow-up discussions with the Vancouver Police Department and ECOM. As a reminder to our presenters, all audio from our meetings is broadcast live on our website, and a complete transcript will also be posted. I'll now ask members of the committee to introduce themselves, and I'll first call on my friend, MLA Kirkpatrick.
Thank you to our chair. Hello, I'm Corinne Kirkpatrick. I am the MLA for West Vancouver Capilano, and I am here on the traditional territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish First Nations.
Thank you. And Emily Halford.
Hi, Trevor Halford, MLA for Surrey White Rock. I am coming to you from the traditional territories of the Semiahmoo First Nations people.
And MLA Sandhu.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'm Harvinder Sandhu, MLA for Vernon Monashee, coming to you from the unceded and traditional territory of the Okanagan Indian Nations. Thank you.
Thank you. MLA Begg.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Chief. I'm Gary Begg. I'm the MLA for Surrey Guildford, coming to you today from the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Kwantlen, the Katsi, and the Semiahmoo First Nations.
And the Deputy Chair of the Committee, MLA Davies.
Hi, good morning, Chief Palmer. Thanks for joining us. Look forward to conversations. Of course, Dan Davies here, MLA for Peace River North, and on the traditional territory of the Dene people.
And MLA Olson.
Morning, Chief. Adam Olson, MLA for Saanich North and the Islands, and proud to live and work and coming to you today from Statinas in the beautiful Saanich territory.
Thanks very much, everyone. Assisting us today are very ably are Karin Riar from the Parliamentary Committee's office and Billy. Oh no, I've lost my note.
Billy Young.
Billy Young from Hansard Services. Sorry, Billy. Now, thank you, everyone. Now, and I'll now introduce Chief Constable Palmer, who you all know, and welcome him back to the committee. The purpose of the meeting today, as Chief Palmer has been made aware, is for us to follow up with questions. We've had the presentations and we've heard a lot of what's been done and what the problems have been, and now we're really in a forward-looking mode where we're looking for the solutions that that our guests might suggest for us. So with that in mind, Chief Palmer, would you be comfortable with us going straight to questions from members?
Yes, and again, good morning, everybody. Adam Palmer, Chief of the Vancouver Police Department, and it's my pleasure to be joining you here today from the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and thankful to be on these lands. And whatever format you would like, if you'd like to go straight into Q&A, that's great with me.
Yeah, I think given what the committee members have indicated to me, they have a lot of questions for you, and we'd really like a full amount of time for that if possible. So I'll go straight to MLA Begg. I can see a hand up this time. My technology has improved.
Thanks, Doug, and good morning, Adam. I think today I want you to be introspective in a forward-thinking way. I wonder, sort of broadly, what keeps you up at night when you think of the future of policing? I know that you're the former chief of the Chiefs, the Canadian Chiefs, Chief of Police Association. And without casting too wide a net, I think you, from your vantage point, have a unique opportunity to sort of point us in a direction that you think would be appropriate. And I say that I know that you've been involved or you have an overview of policing throughout Canada, as well as here in British Columbia. So with that stage, I guess my direct questions are, what keeps you up at night when you think of policing in British Columbia and by extension Canada? And if you could alert us to any situations that you see arising that you think will keep us up at night if we don't get this Police Act reformed so that it is reflective of the policing needs of all of British Columbia. It's a very wide net, I know, but it's the task that we're faced with, and we're looking to you to set some signal posts for us to check along the way.
Well, thank you, sir. Thank you very much for the question, and my pleasure to jump into that one. It is very open-ended, so I'll give it my best shot. I'll just say generally, when I do get asked that question a lot as the chief of police, what keeps me up at night? Generally speaking, I actually sleep quite well, so I'm not hampered by sleep issues. But as far as things that are of concern to me, really more when I'm awake than when I'm asleep. Trust and confidence in policing is a huge issue, and I think that's one nationally that we have to be very alive to. The public has to have trust and confidence. We live in a free and democratic society and a Western democracy, and we're policing by consent. We're not a militarized police. We're not an arm of the state that's oppressing the people. We're here to police by consent of the people, and we need to be accepted by the people, trusted and accountable to the people. So that's probably number one. As far as things that, and I'll get into that a little bit more, but things that I would say normally when I get asked that question about what keeps me up at night, it's actually the health and welfare of our people is of concern to me, because the well-being of police officers right now, morale of police officers, the wear and tear on frontline police across this country, I've never seen anything like it, and they're under extreme pressure with COVID, a lot of the social discussions, which are important, that are taking place, but some of the media narrative has been very, very hard on morale for police officers. But all that aside, I think that we're also in a really good position. And again, the province of British Columbia, I think, kudos to you, because you were one of the first, if not the first provinces to come out and announce you were going to do a full review of the Police Act. And I think that, being very familiar with the landscape in Canada and also the United States, I would say that in Canada, and in particular in British Columbia, we're actually well positioned. We're already at a good starting place. We're not starting from scratch on many of these things. We have a lot of amazing programs to build on and things to really be proud of. And I know that you will hear many different perspectives, which is important, but I think it's also important to hear that perspective from police about some of the great things we've done, where we're at kind of as a baseline, and where we can build from there, because this has been a continuous journey for us. And we're not at the beginning of that slope. We're partway up, and we've got a ways to go, but we've got some great things to build on. The mental health realm was one, and I don't know how much detail you want me to get into. I know there's going to be lots of questions, but particularly mental health and addictions, I know, is a huge issue in our communities, and I could elaborate on that significantly if you would like me to. I just don't want to hog all the time.
Sorry, I don't want
to. Go ahead, Gary.
I don't want to hog the time either, but I wonder if you could be more specific rather than a general approach. There are specific things, I think, of which you're aware that could be done or could be addressed by a revamped Police Act, and those are the kinds of things that we're interested in, sort of markers along the way that are precursors to everything else.
Absolutely. Okay, so when I spoke to you last time, because I know you're getting hit up with all different types of things, 4 very specific things that I mentioned to you. One was about the implementation of body-worn cameras for police in British Columbia. I stand by that one strongly. Oversight model in British Columbia, huge proponent of oversight, and talking about the amalgamation and better coordination between the OPCC, the IIO, and the professional standards sections of individual police departments. And I find it astonishing that we're all sitting here in 2021 and we're still talking about the police investigating themselves. Like, my goodness, we should not be doing that in 2021. There should be outside bodies that are doing the investigations of police. And I've been a proponent of that for many years. And I think that this model we have now can definitely be revamped in that area. And that's an area where you have a lot of influence on this committee. I also spoke to you about the healthcare system, and I'm talking about mental health and addictions as well. And that is an area that needs some help right now in our province. And I'm going to really nail in on that one in a second. And then the fourth thing I talked to you about that is very specific to my city, and that's the downtown east side and the way that the overarching issues that we're seeing in that community. It's a community in distress, not just in Vancouver, not just in BC, but in all of Canada. And it stands out in North America as a community in distress. And I have some ideas on how we can make that community better. But I'm going to focus right now on mental health and addiction, because that's an area where we have so many discussions about police being involved in that space, whether they should be or not. What are the best programs? We hear about programs in Eugene, Oregon, like Cahoots. We hear about ACT. We hear about CAR 87 and CAR 66 and all these different terms that we hear. I'm just going to nail it down, I think, to some very specific points that I think you need to be aware of, that we have some great programs here in British Columbia that we can grow on that are really international best practices. And the three I'm going to tell you about right now, CAR 87, I think you're familiar with it, so I won't belabor it, but that's one where it's the partnership CAR between police and mental health professionals. And that is a great program. We've had it since 1978, and we assist people in crisis with officers in plain clothes, with specialized training, with psychiatric nurses, and we have great results going out into the community. But that is a reactive program, and I think that's important to remember. Like, when you hear about these partnership CARs, that is a solely reactive program. That is not proactive. And I guess an analogy I would like to use from healthcare is that's like going to help the person that already has cancer or stage 4 cancer, and they're really in crisis. I'm actually really interested in these programs that let's help prevent people from getting cancer, or when they've got the first signs of cancer, let's get them on a really healthy path so they don't get to stage 4 and they're not in a life or death crisis. And the two teams that we have that are so leading edge in that area and working closely with Coastal Health are our assertive community treatment teams and our assertive outreach teams. And these are very proactive teams where we work with the healthcare professionals. And I know you will get a perspective from many different people in the community on what police should be involved in or not involved in. But right from Vancouver Coastal Health, I had a meeting last week with our board, our executive, with the board and executive of Vancouver Coastal Health and Providence Healthcare. And I need to give full kudos to Vancouver Coastal Health and Providence Healthcare, because I think in this city, we have built the most progressive approach to mental health in North America. And I haven't seen anybody else with a better program than what we have right here that's proactive. And this involves information sharing agreements. It involves situation tables where we sit down daily with the healthcare professionals. It involves an early warning system where we identify people before they're in crisis. So we will come across people that are having a high number of incidents where they're contacting police, and they're suffering from apparent mental health issues, and also an extraordinary number of hospital visits. And, I think for many of us sitting here at the table, just intuitively as Canadians, we would say, if you're having 10 interactions with the police a month and 15 visits to an emergency department, 25 interactions like that in a month, I think we would all be somewhat horrified and think, how can that possibly be? For any of us to even have one interaction like that would be a significant event in our life. But to have dozens of interactions like that is astounding. But what we've done is developed that data platform where we sit down every day, police officers that are specially trained and a limited number of police officers with healthcare professionals. And we look at the data. Who are those people that are coming into regular contact with the cops, with the healthcare system, and how can we get out there proactively in the community to help them? And this is data driven. And I'm just going to give you a couple of stats. So what we'll do is sit around that situation table. We'll talk about individuals that are at high risk of decompensating. And we're seeing lots of visits by police or ambulance or healthcare. And we go out and we visit those people proactively in the community, and we'll knock on their doors, very low key, very soft approach, plain clothes, and psych nurse and a plainclothes police officer, and it's checking in on them and seeing how they're doing and making sure they're staying on track and making sure that they're going to their visits to Strathcona Mental Health, checking up that they're taking their medication. And when we check on them, if they're doing great and on a good track, then we just say, okay, thank you, that's great. If you need us, here's our number, contact us. We're here anytime you need us. If they need help, we can drive them to appointments. We can take them to hospital if necessary. And in many cases, those healthcare professionals can give medication right at the door. Through that program, where we're proactively going out in the community, we have reduced, and over the past 6 years since we've had that program in Vancouver, there's 2,700 people that we've touched that way that are at high risk of decompensating. We have reduced their calls for service by well over 50% for police and over 60% for healthcare visits. Like, those are data numbers that actually show that this program works. You're not going to see another program that has that kind of results, significant reductions in healthcare and police interactions. And that's separate from CAR 87. They're all part of that interwoven system that we have, but I think we really need to focus on that proactive stuff. And just, again, I don't want to hog all the time, but I do also recognize, though, that in Vancouver, we are fortunate that we are in a large metropolitan area with, the biggest city and the biggest police department in the province. And Metro Vancouver generally, Metro Victoria generally, and some of your bigger centers like Kamloops, Prince George, Kelowna will have advantages as far as resources and things that are available to help the community. And I realize that it will be more of a struggle in some of the outlying communities and places with less population.
Thank you. Go ahead, Trevor.
Thank you, Chief. And you touched on 99% of what I was going to talk about with mental health and what you guys are doing. In terms of some of the other models that you mentioned briefly, and we've talked about them on this call, what to you is standing out outside of our jurisdiction in BC specifically of what is really working and what is something that we can look to adapt in, I wouldn't say real time, but in fairly rapid fashion, whether it's Cahoots or the Memphis model and things like that. So, and are you having those conversations with those jurisdictions? And have you visited them? Have they visited you? And maybe where you're at on that.
Yes, thank you for your question. So very familiar with Memphis model. Actually, a lot of the stuff that we developed here back in Vancouver back in the 80s and 90s was based on the Memphis model, and then we've morphed it and actually grown on that. Very familiar with Cahoots in Eugene, Oregon. We have reached out to Eugene, and I know all the details on that program. Very different set of circumstances than a large metropolitan area like Vancouver is in, but there are some good takeaways. The other piece of that, which I think comes into the conversation quite regularly, is what about those calls where you don't have to have police officers attending? And I think that's worth talking about. So with the Cahoots program, they have calls where you won't have a police officer go at all, and they'll provide assistance in the community. In Vancouver, what we do with that is we have other programs in place. So we have a thing called IHOT, the Integrated Housing Outreach Team. We have the OOT, the Overdose Outreach Teams, which are like street nurses. We have the Vancouver Access and Assessment Center that runs out of VGH, which takes about 7,000 calls per year. We have these other entities that are run by healthcare or other service providers that are helping people with housing, with mental health, with addictions, that are not police, that provide an amazing service, and they take away those calls, and VPD doesn't even go to those types of calls. So many of those calls that you hear about are taken away in Eugene, Oregon. Those are already taken away in Vancouver, and we're not responding to those types of calls. There are still a small number that we do respond to that I feel that we don't have to, but we've done very detailed data analysis on this, and we've looked at all of the calls that we respond to with mental health as a factor, and 84% of those calls will still require the attendance of police for one reason or another. And the reason I just point out to you is that if it's a criminal offense, and I'm not talking about criminality where somebody that has a mental health issue may be a suspect, but there's a high victimization rate amongst people in our communities that have mental health issues. For example, in Vancouver, you're 15 times more likely to be the victim of a crime if you have mental health issues, and 23 times more likely to be the victim of a violent crime if you have mental health issues, 19 times more likely to be the victim of crime if you're suffering from homelessness issues. So people that are marginalized in our communities that have all kinds of issues that they're dealing with and challenges, they're being victimized in our communities. So if there's criminality involved, whether you're a suspect, victim, witness, reportee, the police will still be involved because that is bread and butter, investigating crime by police. There are also elements under provincial statutes under the Mental Health Act, for example, Section 28 of the Mental Health Act. If somebody is in distress, they're suffering from an apparent mental health disorder and a danger to themselves or others, there's statutory requirement of the police to apprehend that person and take them forthwith to a physician. So that would be another bucket in there. We also have a number of those calls, about 26% of them, where it's actually the healthcare providers calling us because they don't have the resources or the training or the ability to go out in the community and deal with it. And many of these calls, I just think you have to be alive to, is that when we talk to Vancouver Coastal Health, when we talk to the psychiatric nurses that work with us, they are not comfortable going into many of these situations, the majority of these situations, without police officers present in plain clothes, low key. The nurses will do the majority of the talking, but having that police backup, because some of these situations, quite frankly, are dangerous. And about 12% of the cases involve weapons. So we've broken it down very specifically through our data and know exactly those numbers. So in Vancouver, we get about 700 calls for service every day. When we've looked at the numbers, there's probably about 6 of those calls that we could still shed off of our call load. It's a very small number, but if we're able to give those to overdose outreach teams, to the IHOT teams, to ACCS, those types of programs, we do that. We also work with our jail. Like our jail's got very advanced programs where people that come in either with fentanyl addiction issues, any kind of addiction issues, mental health issues, we have a stream there where we can get them on a good path before they leave our jail. So we're not just taking somebody into the jail, spinning them around 3 times and then sending them back out. We're actually trying to get them onto a good path as we head them out. And also with the downtown community court, closely dialed in with our mental health resources so that when somebody is going through a criminal justice issue, our mental health teams are dialed in with that as well to provide that person assistance. But I'm a firm believer, let's help people out before they get into the criminal justice system. I don't want it so that they've got to be arrested or charged before we can give them help. Let's help folks out when they're suffering in our communities. So there's lots of different stuff out there, little bits and pieces of takeaways from all these programs. But again, every community will be slightly different in British Columbia. I think we can take the lessons from Vancouver. Surrey's doing some great work as well. So is Victoria, Eugene, Memphis. You can take a lot of those things, and we've taken them and kind of synthesized them into the Vancouver model, which we're very, very pleased with. But I think there's some great takeaways that you could utilize there.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that, Chief. And thank you as well for allowing me to do a ride along there last week. It was extremely enlightening for myself. And I had the opportunity to go out with one of your outreach teams for a few hours and just saw how that worked. And it was incredible, the work they do. And what really got me was, going into some of these SROs that are in Vancouver with your plainclothes members there and seeing the relationship, which was unbelievable. First name basis with every single person that we came across. There was a lot of respect there, and like you say, it was really enlightening to be out with that team, and I encourage my colleagues to, if they're able to try and do the same. Also had the opportunity to experience and see the Car 80. Well, and I also learned Car 88 and Car 87. One's night shift, one's day shift, which didn't understand, and to see how they roll out. And it wasn't what I thought it was. I was a little. It was certainly, again, a learning experience for me to understand that my idea around that Car 87, Car 88 program was, that they're out, doing the frontline stuff, but they're more of that support and trying, as you say, getting people before they get into the system, helping and supporting and such. So that, like I say, it was really neat to see all that work. And again, I thank you for the opportunity to come out. I have a number of questions, and again, I already recognize our time's halfway gone, so I won't take all the time here. One thing that we've heard quite a bit is support for police officers. We heard this yesterday as well, mental health supports, and obviously members of police forces, doesn't matter where they are, experience a lot of trauma themselves compared to what the average person does, which puts a lot of strain mental health wise, which obviously impacts their performance at work, their performance at home, their performance generally speaking, and how they deliver. So my first question is, what other things, are you looking at, and what supports do you feel that we should be looking at to support, you in providing a service to your members?
Yes, thank you very much, sir, for that question. And I heard that you were out with us. I'm sorry our schedules didn't align. I didn't get a chance to meet you, but I appreciate you coming out and looking in the first, front lines, firsthand what's going on. I think it's so important, and I would just, offer to any members of the committee, if any of you, I know some of you are from Lower Mainland, but if any of you are in Vancouver or want to come out with us and either go out with a frontline patrol officer or one of our mental health units, that offer is standing, and I would welcome you to come at any time. We can make it fit around your schedules, and we're really happy to do that. So as far as officers, yes, the pressures are significant. I'm just going to talk about a couple things quickly, and then perhaps some things that we could do to help them. COVID-19 has hit people like significantly hard in society as a whole. And for example, we're meeting here today on Zoom, and we're talking and having a great conversation. Police officers, firefighters, paramedics, nurses, a lot of those frontline people and people in other industries never had that luxury of being able to meet by Zoom, self-isolate, stay out of the fray. They've been out there, like as soon as COVID hit, we were just continuing on 24/7, 365, putting in protocols, at great expense to keep the service to the public up there. And, the unfortunate thing is the inherent nature of policing is that there are going to be times where you will have to touch somebody, whether it's breaking up a fight or arresting somebody. So you do have to come in close contact with people sometimes. And it's very stressful for officers and for their families, put under a lot of pressure. And then we also saw, a lot of again, I mentioned, after the tragic murder of George Floyd down in Minneapolis, we saw a social justice change in the world, which for the good. I think these conversations are so important, but it has put an incredible strain on officers. And we have seen sick time go up. We've seen WorkSafe BC claims go up. As you know, within the last few years, they've started to accept PTSD claims and things of that nature, operational stress injuries. So these are real issues in our community. And the average person in their life will suffer a handful of traumatic incidents, in the range of about 6 to 8, whether it's getting cancer or having a loved one die or whatever it is, things that will really hit us to the core as human beings. And police officers will suffer those 6 to 8 things as well, but they will also suffer about 150 other events in their life through their work that are so traumatic, seeing extreme violence, blood, murder, homicide, people that have died in car accidents, abused children, women who have been victims of really violent sexual assaults, really traumatic things that will impact them way more so than the average community member at large. And that's well documented by psychologists. And so that's sort of circulating around all of this, plus the fact that in Vancouver, assaults against police officers are up 51% over the last 5 years. In Metro Vancouver, it's around 50%, so the numbers are quite consistent. So we're seeing more and more people. It's not necessarily punching somebody in the face, although that's happening, and we're seeing officers get kicked and punched and scratched and all that. But things like biting, female officers getting their hair pulled, officers being spit in the face has become quite common, which is absolutely disgusting. And I will say that I would rather be punched in the face than spit in the face. And it's degrading and insulting, and we're just seeing a dramatic increase in those types of events. And I talk to every single officer in my department when they're the victim of any kind of an assault, and I have a very good handle on that. We have many programs at VPD and in policing, like RCMP and other municipal police, to assist officers through peer support, through critical incident stress management, through our HR processes. There's many different programs available. Our unions, the BC Police Association and the Vancouver Police Union, have done a great job of working with us to develop some of these programs. But this is going to be an ongoing challenge for us. And this is something that we need to provide support and realize that in British Columbia, we spend way more money on police oversight than we do on training and supporting officers. And the oversight's important, but let's not forget, like, our people are our most valuable resource, bar none. And I'm a firm believer that if you have a strong, healthy, happy workforce with good morale, they will provide physically healthy and mentally well, they will provide better service to the community. If you have a bunch of people that are disgruntled and upset and mad at the world and nobody likes them, it's just human nature with any human being. If they're feeling like that all the time, it's going to reflect on the way they do their job. So let's support these folks that have a really, really tough job in our community. And I acknowledge that, when we go to hundreds of thousands of calls per year in Vancouver, sometimes things go astray and we don't get it right, and we make mistakes, and we do things that we would like to have a redo on, and things that shouldn't have happened. But in the heat of the moment, in hundreds of thousands of calls, making split-second decisions, sometimes things go sideways that shouldn't have, but well over 99% of the time, things go well. And it's the old airplane landing safely at the airport, nobody cares. Something goes awry and it's front page news in our profession. But supports there's great programs with the unions, with our agencies. We could send you some stuff again, like in writing offline, but mental health supports, WorkSafe supports, training supports. There's all kinds of programs, from more general programs that we give to our officers to really intense programs that we can take officers that may be suffering from severe PTSD and operational stress injuries to help make them healthy again and get them back on track. When I came on the job 34 years ago, there was none of that. And we would go to a call and the next day, bang, you're right back at it. And, the Honorable Mr. Begg, I'm sure could relate to that when he was a member of the RCMP, is that back then the supports were just not in place. Agencies have come a long way. There's some really good practices across the country that we can build on, but this is going to be ever evolving. We need to keep these folks healthy when they go to work every day.
Great, thanks. And one final quick question, and we've heard a lot about de-escalation. The challenges of we see on the media. It seems overexertion of force, overuse of force. Around other issues around, understanding cultural differences, police recognizing that, the overrepresentation of Indigenous populations, that systemic piece that we've been talking about a lot. So I want to tie all of that back into what's missing from police training, that we need to, we, the collective, we need to improve, because we are still seeing these issues happening today. Again, whether it's in the justice system or otherwise, there is a significant difference of overrepresentation of, marginalized population in the system. We see all of these issues. Can some of this be addressed in the training, whether it's at the JI or depot in Saskatchewan? What is missing?
Yes, thank you. So again, that's a really large one to unpack, but I'm happy to make some comments again, being cognizant of time. Use of force is something that, when police have interventions, interactions with the general public, again, important to know the context that it's in less than 1% in my department, and I think it's a pretty standard number across the country, where use of force is actually used. It's used infrequently, and de-escalation training and calming things down. I always say, like I tell the recruits, it's your job. You have to bring calm to chaos. And when you come into these calls, that you're going to be dealing with people on the worst day of their life, and people that are, looking to, jump off bridges, people with weapons, people that are involved in domestic violence, organized crime figures. You're dealing with some pretty violent people sometimes, even bar fights, things like that. You've got to go in, you got to be professional, and you got to calm things down and get control of a situation. Sometimes force is used by police. Sometimes people are intoxicated. Sometimes people may be on drugs. There could be mental health issues. There could be just people that are extremely violent and dangerous that are stone cold sober, but they may be involved in organized crime and they don't want to be caught. So many circumstances where we would have to employ force. Nobody wants to employ force, but that does happen. I'll tell you, the training, and you brought up training, it is very important. And I think that I'm a big proponent of training. Again, I will say that the playing field is not leveled across the entire country. When we're talking about British Columbia, again, you should be proud that in this province, through the Solgens Ministry, Mr. Farnworth and Police Services Division, they've actually done a really good job of making sure that we are staying up to speed on modernizing training in British Columbia and looking at things that are important to British Columbians and our communities, and listening to our communities, like and not just from the police perspective, but what they're experiencing, what they're feeling, where they think we can do better. We have to listen to all that, and we have to be alive to all that and build that into our training. So I just want you to know, like, the amount of training that police officers get in British Columbia is substantive. Like in my own department, crisis and de-escalation training, we've been focusing on, I mean, even when I came on the job, we had that, but really we've been focusing on it significantly since 2012, long before the provincial government came out with standards on that. Fair and impartial training, implicit bias training for police officers, Indigenous police relations. These are some of the training that we do now currently. Indigenous cultural safety training has been embedded in our training for the last decade. Circle of understanding workshops that we're doing. We do training at the Justice Institute for all recruits on anti-racism, bias-free policing. They have to do projects where they look at things like restorative justice, homelessness, Indigenous populations in our communities. We do community awareness training, culturally safe practice training, trauma-informed practices. So when you're dealing with people that are victims of crime, that have been severely traumatized, culturally sensitive training, aware not just if somebody's a victim of sexual assault, but if there's a cultural component to that as well. Trauma-informed practices, road to mental readiness, neurological and neuromuscular degenerative disease training that we've done, autism awareness, 2S LGBTQ awareness training, a lot of Aboriginal Indigenous cultural competency training here at VPD, sex worker awareness training that we've done, youth at risk training, homeless awareness training, geriatric mental health training, as well as all the provincial standards on crisis intervention and de-escalation that the province does. We go beyond that training. That's the bare minimum requirement in British Columbia. We give our officers about 5.5 extra weeks of basic training at VPD that is not provided at the Justice Institute. So when people graduate after that, I think it's a 22 week program roughly of classroom training, we add on an additional 5.5 weeks of training to make sure they're up to our standards, which is higher than the provincial standards. And also training like, in major case management, when you're dealing with serious incidents, how we approach victims of crime. We have other training courses that we're going to be delivering in Q4 this year and into 2021 on anti-racism awareness training for police officers, more coming up on mental illness awareness training, more on homelessness, more on sex work. There is a ton of training going on in my department, and other departments in British Columbia will be there to different extents. So there's some that's baseline provincial training, but many departments like my own have gone beyond that and providing additional training. I can't speak to what individual departments have done, but I think sometimes people think that the cops are starting at a baseline, they get no training, they don't know what they're doing. There's a lot of training. And I will say that we're welcome to more training. And again, this goes back to my earlier comments about police legitimacy and accountability and acceptance in the community. And people need to know, and we probably haven't done a great job sometimes, quite frankly, of getting our message out about the training, about these great programs we have, the proactive programs. We're working with community, we're working with professionals like the healthcare professionals to keep our community safe. But happy to work on more training. I think it's great, but just be informed that there's a lot of good training going on and we could provide that to you, what we're doing at VPD. And there may be some lessons learned. It's like, okay, you could take this from Vancouver, you could take this from the RCMP, you could take this from Victoria. Let's look at that and let's really use all that expertise we have, or it could be from the States or back east, but build an even more robust training program we have for police in British Columbia.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Corinne.
Thank you very much for that. Mine's pretty tactical in nature. So in order to save time here, perhaps, Karen, I'll read it into Hansard, but we can use it and Chief Palmer can perhaps direct it more specifically to a person that can answer. I'm very interested in what you were talking about on the preventative side, the data platform that you're looking at, identifying people who have multiple interactions with police so that can be de-escalated or managed prior to that. It sounded like it was a specific program that you've got. I was curious about resources and who did that, where they did it, how that worked. But that's a very specific question to that activity. So perhaps I can ask someone that oversees that or directly as opposed to your time right now.
I can answer that quickly for you. Yes, so we have put a lot of time, effort, and resources into developing a very robust analytical capability in Vancouver. We have about 30 analysts that work for the VPD that do all kinds of work. We have PhDs working for us. We have many people with master's degrees and specialized training. The adjunct professor who teaches analytics at Simon Fraser University is a full-time VPD officer, a special constable, and he does the analytics training at SFU off the corner of his desk. He's a doctor up there. So we've got in-house expertise. We put money into very advanced technical systems. I can pull you data on anything you can imagine under the sun. We've got very robust platforms, but developing that, we call it the early warning system. So pulling that data out of the people that are at high risk to decompensate and have issues in the community. We developed that ourselves with Vancouver Coastal Health on our 2 data platforms, because the police have very good data and so does health, but sometimes that data is not shared well. So that's where we went that extra step and developed the information sharing agreements that have gone through, the privacy commissioner, and making sure that it's limited number of people that would have access to that. It's not all officers. It's very specific people that have training in that area, that work in the mental health sphere all the time. But if you want more information on that, we have a report, and I also have a video that we've done that explains some of that we could send to you. But if you wanted more details, I could connect you definitely with Superintendent Lynn Noftel, who oversees that area, and Inspector Randy Fincham oversees that area of expertise in our department. But a lot of it was developed in-house by our folks.
Thank you very much. I'm very interested in the preventative nature of that, and thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Go ahead, Harwinder. We're over time, but people are very interested in asking these questions.
Thank you, Chair. It'll be quick. I have other questions, but I'll ask about around Chief. First of all, thank you so much for highlighting mental health and some other areas and the work that's been done. When we talk about systemic racism, and we're all aware that BC had the, according to 2018 independent study, highest rate of deaths in the country when it comes to police involved deaths. And we talk about training and more training. What are your thoughts? Is that the only answer? So far, it doesn't seem like it. And do you think, what about the proper screening done before hiring? And, we've seen at different workplaces, trainings are mandatory. People go do that, whatever 8-hour session or whatnot. So we've heard from many presentations, and it seems like, what are your thoughts about if we do look at more like screening tools or different other areas? Or you think training would address these big issues that we're facing? Thank you.
No, thank you. No, I think you're absolutely correct. And no, I appreciate you recognizing, the mental health aspect as well, because I was just going to say that is so important, not only for the community at large, but also for our own people internally. But as far as, looking at issues that are systemic within policing and issues that, could be improved upon, certainly training is one of them, but you did hit on another area that is very key. And, the screening of police officers and making sure that we're getting the right people into the profession. And again, you'll find that that is not standardized across this province. So there's certain, standardized training. There's certain things that people have to go through to qualify as a municipal police officer in British Columbia, or if you were RCMP officer in Depot for sure. But training and hiring standards are different in Vancouver, in Delta, Victoria, Transit Police, the RCMP, the Ontario Provincial Police, you name it. Like, there's a lot of different things that go on, like looking at, diversifying the workforce, of course, is very important. But, educational requirements, volunteerism, work references, physical, medical, written tests, there's all kinds of things that go into the process. It's very in-depth. Polygraph, psychological testing. There's many different things, but I will say not every agency does all of those things. Some of those agencies do some of them, but not all of them. And I would say some do that screening process better than others. So there are some best practices that can be learned there 100%. I agree with you. And that could be something that I think could be interesting for your committee from a standardization perspective, especially for municipal police, because of course the RCMP are a little bit different because they're national, but standardization on some of those practices would be an interesting area to look at. Getting the right people on those key. And one of the challenges that we have right now is that across North America, not just in Vancouver, RCMP, BC, Canada, throughout North America and in other places in the Western world, we're seeing, when I talk to my contacts there in Europe, UK, Australia, we're seeing generally the number of applications for police officers are down. And we're seeing that, I think, a lot of, again, it's the, probably a sign of the times. And I think a lot of the, narrative that's going on, a lot of people are thinking, well, maybe I'll take another career path. They find it interesting, but I just think with all the stuff going on, I think I'm just going to take a pass for now and see how things play out. But we have, some amazing people, young people in our communities that step up and do this job, which is a very challenging job, but we are still missing some people that, just really are turned off by the profession, quite frankly, and our numbers are down from where they used to be. But the other piece of it is also attracting the right people. So it's not just the screening process that you go through, but looking at the outreach programs. And that again varies from Vancouver to RCMP to other municipal departments, online versus in person, versus building community relationships so that you have a relationship, for example, like I'll just use our cadet program where we're involved with kids, ages 15, 16, 17 in high school that are part of our cadet program. And it's kind of like, if you think of Girl Guides, Boy Scouts, Navy cadets, that sort of idea, we have police cadets in Vancouver where we get teenagers, many of whom are suffering from challenges in their life, such as, they may have a parent in jail, they may have alcohol or drug issues in their family, there may be mental health issues at play, or there may be none of that. Like everybody has a different story in life. But we take in kids, and kids sometimes that need a leg up in life, and we bring them into our cadet program. We've had hundreds of kids go through that program, and we teach them about leadership. We teach them about team building. We teach them about, we do athletics as well with them, but we teach them about community giving. We teach them skills like public speaking. We teach them all kinds of things that aren't your traditional things that you would learn in school, like, the old reading, writing, arithmetic, and that sort of thing. But we teach them things that are actually really good life skills. And whether they go on to become police officers or not, they will be better citizens because of it. But a lot of those kids that had a thought, well, maybe I do, maybe I don't want to be a cop kind of idea. A lot of those kids now are convinced that they do want to. And even some of the kids that came in, some were, like the parents kind of nudged them and said, hey, why don't you do this program? Others, wanted to do it on their own. But now they've seen that it's a really rewarding profession and you can make a huge difference in people's lives. And these kids now we're getting that are going through that process from teenager to wanting to be a police officer. But we've created a continuum here in Vancouver where teenager to becoming a special municipal constable, where you can do, we have two-tiered policing here. So you've got regular officers, but then that second tier, that would be another one. I don't know if you've heard anything on that, but that would be another area to really look at, where you can take away some of those duties that you don't need a fully armed police officer to do. And, things like directing traffic at car accidents, or guarding crime scenes, or collecting forensic video evidence, transporting property. You pull over a vehicle with 10 stolen bikes. Why do you need a cop to take those bikes to the property office? So using special municipal constables who get paid less, but they're generally younger, and they're people that have an interest in policing, they get more experience. So that continuum from teenage cadet to special municipal constable to becoming a police officer. And the really good thing about that program is that not only does it let that person know whether they want to be a police officer and whether it's for them, it also allows us as a police agency to do, it's really like a job evaluation. We look at that person over the long term and see if they're cut out and they have the right personality to do this type of work, and they're thoughtful and compassionate and they're problem solvers and they're respectful people. And it helps us know what that person is like because they've been part of our organization sometimes for 3 or 4 years before they even apply. There's a lot of things to unpack there.
Thank you. And thank you for saying that, right people. And I think on that note, we should also take in consideration that having people from Indigenous and some other cultural backgrounds to build that trust that you mentioned in the very beginning, trust and confidence is something. So thank you. I really appreciate those ideas.
You're welcome. I will just say on that note, just so you know, in our cadet program, we have a separate Indigenous cadet program as well, where we work with Indigenous youth. But in our cadet program, which we put, I think it's about 350 or 60 kids through it, many of those kids are Indigenous. And that, if you looked at a picture of our cadet program, it represents the mosaic of Vancouver. It really does. Male, female, different cultural diversity. It really shows, if you were to walk down the street in Vancouver, you see that in the kids in our cadet program.
Excellent. Thank you. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to my colleagues for your questions. And just to take off a little bit on what Harwinder was just asking about, Chief. one of the things that we've heard fairly consistently is safety within policing departments. And I know that you can't speak on behalf of other police departments in the province, only on behalf of the Vancouver Police Department. But one of the challenges with respect to recruiting is going to be the perception that workplaces are not necessarily safe for gender diverse people, for BIPOC officers, that once they make the decision to become part of policing, that the workplace is toxic for them, and that many end up leaving the profession with some bitterness that they got into it for one reason and had to leave because they raised some issues and were not supported by the leadership. What is your police department doing specifically? What are you doing as the leader of that department to ensure that your workplace is safe for diverse officers with diverse backgrounds, whether it be gender diversity or Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, just generally? And so, yeah, thanks.
No, thank you very much, sir. I have to say, every time I hear you, they call you Adam, I'm always thinking they're asking me a question. But yeah, no, thank you very much for that. So this is another really important area. We do want safe, healthy, respectful workplaces, and there's so much work that needs to be done there. I will say that, again, from when I started many years ago, we have gone light years in the right direction in that area. You may be fascinated to know that in the Vancouver Police Department, 53% of our people are not white males. 47% are, 53% are not. So the majority of people that work here are not white males. And we have come a long way from the old days of the 6 foot tall, 200-pound white male with a mustache that's a police officer. And that is not the case anymore in Vancouver and in many other departments. But I think, quite frankly, we've gone leaps and bounds in the city. I've got over 400 police women that work in Vancouver that are out on the streets, working with the public. We've got incredible diversity in our staff, both ethnic diversity, gender diversity. In 2019, I started a respectful workplace committee because I wanted to get together people from different ranks, different divisions. What I mean by that is different work sites, whether you're in operations, investigations, or administrative areas, people with different seniority, different ethnic and gender diversity as well. Get a good cross-section of people, and whether you're somebody that's got 1 year on the job and you're just starting out your career, or you're somebody that has 35 years on the job and you're very experienced and maybe high ranking, get a wide cross-section of people in that room and look at what we're doing well, but where we have gaps, and have those tough conversations about what's not working and how we can do things better. Because having a supportive, inclusive workplace is key. I will say that when you look at our academy classes that we're bringing into the department now, they are so diverse and have such incredible talents. It's just absolutely remarkable. And it's over time, like you will see the demographics and changes in all police departments. And in my own, we are seeing, as people retire and new people come in, that diversity improves every single year. But it's not, the diversity is important, but it's also about getting people with the right skills as well and training, and that they're respectful people and they're thoughtful people. But this workplace committee has done a great job. And as a result of that, we're looking at changing policies. We're looking at training issues. We're looking at recruiting issues. We're also doing an equity, diversity, and inclusion review of all of our policies, our training materials, our HR materials, our regulation and procedure manual, our jail manual, our HR manual, going through every single policy or training material piece that we have in this department to make sure, and it's a very diverse group of officers and civilian professionals doing it, going through that and looking at through an EDI lens, making sure that we don't have relics in there of our policies that were developed, maybe back in the 90s or early 2000s that don't meet the proper requirements of a healthy organization in 2021, and we're changing those. And those are coming through, and we're looking at all those items, and whether it's wording changes, whether it's assumptions that are made in policies, whether it's different ways of looking at things. We have an active committee of about 5 or 6 people that are working on that full time, going through all of, and you can imagine in a place the size of VPD, there's thousands of pages of documents to go through, and they're going through every single one, every policy to make that better. So putting a committee like that in place is huge. Being aware of your policies and procedures, I would say for any police organization, that's a best practice to do. is get that external, because we have external people working with us as well, looking at our policies and making sure these are the right policies for a modern police agency in 2021. Because we did have some things in there that were antiquated that needed to be changed. I'll just give you one example. We had one in there where it referred to the chief constable as a he. I mean, that's a throwback to, probably that was written back in the 1980s or something when the chiefs were always men. But the world is changing dramatically and we can't make assumptions like that anymore. And we're removing all that and we're changing the narrative with our people to make sure that everybody's in tune to that. And I will tell you, like young people coming in to the organization, there's no issues with buy-in or any issues with, people having that as a hard sell. They expect that of our organizations and they expect us to be thoughtful and caring and compassionate.
Thanks. We're over time, but I've got one more question. Go ahead, Gary.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Adam. One quick question about training. As a training officer, the only thing that we really monitored was attendance. So you check off the box, so-and-so received a course on Indigenous relations. So there were no real metrics attached to the impact or the affect of the training on the individual. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder what policies and procedures you have in place at VPD to ensure that the training is not only received, but becomes practice.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. It's a great question. As a former training officer, I'll tell you, like, that is such an important aspect of it because the old days, and we were the same, back in the day, where it's just you would tick off a box whether, somebody showed up at training or not. There's many different ways that we can do that. So one, for example, on the policy side of it. So if we have something that's a policy change, something that is of significant value to our members that they need to know. I'm not talking about like a policy change that's, fill out Form A for your annual leave as opposed to Form B, not that kind of thing, but anything that we do to do with dealing with the public. Like I'll use our handcuffing policy as an example because it's very, very topical and it's happening right now. So in our handcuffing policy, that is one where we're making some significant changes. So through civilian oversight, through the Vancouver Police Board, working with our board, working with an outside consultant, coming up with a modern 2021 handcuffing policy that's actually going to our board next week. But I'll just tell you the internal processes to get towards what you're saying. Once that policy is approved by our police board, which is their responsibility under the Police Act, that will be sent out to all police officers. We have an electronic tracking mechanism called Power DMS at VPD, where we can send it out to all sworn officers, all civilian professionals, or both. And we can send it out to the entire department. And people have to read it. You have to sign off on it electronically that you have read and understood that policy. So there's accountability there. But the other piece of it, though, is building that in to your physical training. So something like handcuffing, there's an intuitive, read of it. We could all read a handcuffing policy, but the actual putting that into practice and how that plays out on the street. So then our training officers that work at our tactical training center, they then take that policy and they build that in to the narrative and to the instruction on how to do handcuffing and not only how to do handcuffing, but how you document it. And we don't parse off and segregate our training anymore. Like many years ago, you'll be familiar that we used to do firearms training, and then we would do baton training, and then OC spray training, and then taser training, and then wrist locks and handcuffing, and everything would be separate. Go over here and do this, and go over there and do that. Now, our officers, when they go into training, they don't know what the scenarios are going to be. We do so much scenario-based training with our officers that when they come in, it could be a situation where you're going to come in and you're going to de-escalate that verbally, and that will be the end of it. The next officer may come in and it may be something where they have to go hands-on with somebody and handcuff somebody. It could be right up to something that includes deadly force, but you don't even know walking in the door because that's the reality of policing. So we don't segment it out so that everything is siloed anymore. It's all one continuum built in with the policy piece as well. So that's an ever evolving, landscape. We also are firm believers in, and again, resourcing is an issue, but we do have the luxury here in Vancouver of using actors and role players in our scenario training. So you're not just, looking at a computer screen, or you're not just talking about it notionally. You have some of them are our cadets. Some of them are like university students that come in and they do these acting scenarios. We use it with our public order group for crowd situations. We use it for scenarios like domestic violence or whatever it is. We have actors that will put the officers through their paces And I'll tell you, as you would know, when you have actors and you're dealing with a scenario like that, it does up your adrenaline and your stress and your pressure, and it makes it more real than dealing with it notionally. And we also make a concerted effort, and that's mandatory, that we have 4 mandatory training days per year. So officers in patrol on the front lines have to come in for 4 mandatory training days per year. It's not like a once a year, one and done, like they're coming in for, it could be police intervention, it could be de-escalation, it could be cultural awareness training, it could be legal updates, there could be a number of things, but we give them 4 full days of mandatory training every year on topical issues in policing to make sure they're staying up to speed, because you cannot rest on your laurels on any of this stuff.
Thanks very much. I don't see any more questions. I want to thank you very much, Chief Palmer, for coming back, and also for all of this insight that you've provided us. From my perspective, I would like to just finish by asking, it's really impressive that this approach that's being taken, and sort of trying to be on the forefront of 21st century policing, and we appreciate that. If you can give some thought, and this is asking you to do yet another thing for this committee, and I know that's a stretch, but think about sections or elements of the Police Act that inhibit your ability to achieve what you've talked about here today. That if there are aspects of the Act that are equally antiquated, and we know there are, that stand as obstacles to the accomplishment of some of these goals. If you could perhaps give a head shake to that for us, and maybe even a letter would be deeply appreciated, I'm sure.
Yes, thank you very much. And I will provide some written material to your staff. We do have their contact information. We'll make sure that we forward that material so that you have as much information as possible. I just want to say again, in closing, from my perspective, thank you so much. I really think this is important work that you're doing to improve public safety in British Columbia. It is leading edge, I think, what you're doing across the country. So my hat goes off to you, and I'm really excited to see what kind of results come out of this committee. I believe it's April will be the final report, and look forward to seeing it and implementing whatever changes you come up with.
Thanks. And I can say as an observation that, there are lots of problems and there are some poor outcomes out there for sure, but the efforts that people are making within policing aren't a light switch that gets turned on and off, and the generational change. And so I'm relieved to hear of the efforts that are being made. Thank you for describing them for us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, committee members, we'll take a 5-minute recess before we invite our next guest. I'd like to welcome everybody back to our meeting of the Special Committee on Reforming the Police Act in British Columbia. And for this section of our meeting, we're inviting back and receiving more information from Oliver Gruter-Andrew, President and CEO of ECOM. And thank you very much, Oliver, for joining our committee again. I think you know all of us. We've all met here, so I won't belabor further introductions and more of your time. So
thank you.
With that, I think members have specific questions that they'd like to ask. So with your agreement, we'll get right to them. If you have any initial comments, go ahead now. Hello?
Hello, I just lost the sound somehow, but I'm back now, I think. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Thank you. Oh, I was just suggesting that we're very grateful to have you rejoin us again, and knowing everybody on the committee, I won't belabor with further introductions to your time, but we'll pretty much go straight to questions. But if you have any initial comments, now would be the time. So I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for having me back and giving me the opportunity. I'm again here speaking from the beautiful territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people in Vancouver, and I'm looking forward to the dialogue, and I'm looking forward to the actions that follow this dialogue.
Thank you very much. And with that, members, if members have questions, I see a hand up already from MLA Begg.
Thanks, Chair, and welcome back, Oliver. Pretty topical to have you here at this time because of the emerging issues in ECOM, particularly related to staffing. I wonder if you can fill us in on or give us a sort of more global sense of what is happening and what steps are being taken to handle it.
Are you specifically asking about the delays in 911 calls and the ambulance downstream? Yeah, okay. So the situation is that there is a higher than anticipated, higher than ever before number of ambulance calls coming into 911, so callers requesting ambulance service. And part of that is that the ambulance service itself has difficulties receiving and processing all these calls. That's well established. We know that Minister Dix has committed additional resources, the money is available, and ambulance service is working very hard to hire, train, and then deploy those additional staff to deal with the demand that the public has at this time. What happens at our end is that we're not understaffed for 911 calls relative to what's expected of us, relative to what we are funded for, and relative to normal process. But at this time, because of the excessive demand compared to other times, we get into situations where the handoff from ECOM's 911 call taker, who will have said to you, this is 911, do you need police, fire, or ambulance? The handoff to the ambulance service call taker can take significantly longer than it historically takes. Instead of being seconds, as it typically takes, it can be minutes, it can be many minutes. And our call takers are obliged to stay on the line with the caller until the handoff to the person at ambulance service is successfully completed. Of course, while our call taker waits on the line, they are not then able to take the next 911 call that's coming into the queue of somebody waiting to hear, do you need police, fire, or ambulance? And that's the bottleneck delay that we're in at the moment. And what's being done about it is that ambulance service are working as hard as possible to find the number of people, the right people, and train them to be able to close that gap on the downstream side. As you will appreciate, when we are on the line with an ambulance caller, we can't help that individual. Our people are not trained, they're not authorized to give medical advice. We have put into place some escalation options with ambulance service. So if we're able to discern that the nature of the call is particularly acute, we are able to work with ambulance on giving that call priority. And there are many, many other things that we're doing in partnership with ambulance to relieve the pressure on a day-to-day basis. It's a very positive partnership, but that's where we're at with that circumstance at the moment. Now, I should ask, there is also a staffing issue on our part on the police call taking side, which is a funding issue for us. And I'm happy to speak to that too, if you would like to hear about that as well.
Please.
So on the police call taking side, for many years now, volumes have increased, but also the complexities of calls have increased. And that's a reflection of everything that's been discussed at this committee. I was listening to your dialogue with Chief Palmer just earlier, and it's reflective of everything that the chief talked about in terms of the societal pressures, the increases in mental health situations, in opioid situations, and many, many other forms. And as a result, our ability to process calls coming in has been diminished. And there are two types of police calls we take. We take the 911 calls, but we also take the non-emergency calls. That's when you call the 10-digit number to reach your local police department for the agencies that we serve. And it's a pool of people that answers both types of calls. You will appreciate that when we have high demand, we prioritize the emergency calls because that's where life and death situations typically come to reach us. So we deprioritize non-emerge. And at that point, there can be very long wait times for non-emerge calls. And I'm not talking about just a few minutes, we're talking 30, 40 minutes. And that is a resourcing issue. And that's also well documented. That's also well communicated. That's being discussed by us and has been for a number of years with our police agency partners, with our city partners. And we're all trying to work together to resolve that problem too. Funding is an issue there, but so are practices. So is consistency of practices. So are the little things that have come out of the history of how we handle these kind of inquiries from the public that can make the process a lot more complicated, and more work needs to be done to optimize how we actually support the public in their different levels of needs. As you can picture, the two issues that I've described are right now compounding. So when we have 911 calls building up, waiting to be answered, we try to divert everybody as possible to those 911 calls waiting to hear, do you need police, fire, or ambulance? Which then further deprecates our ability to answer police calls, which then further pushes down the attention we can give to non-emergency calls. So the whole situation right now is very much compounding, and it's very much affecting all emergency services, police, fire, and ambulance.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much for coming back and having this discussion with us. A couple questions. I won't say they're quick. Around and understanding that you have multiple contracts throughout the province and such. When a mental health call comes in, and I think we talked about this last time briefly, are there any? Do you have any of your contracts with these different areas that actually have designated someone specialized in answering or dealing with mental health stress calls, or is that dealt with by just one of your regular operators and then forwarded on to police, fire, ambulance?
It is the latter. So our staff have some general overview training of handling mental health calls. For the most part, it's in the selection of the people when we hire them on how they're able to support mental health circumstances. Unfortunately, our funding circumstance is such that we cannot provide the depth of training to our staff that we would like to provide and that some of our agency partners are able to provide. So we have a deficit there that we need to step up on. However, in the whole setup from a policy, from a legal obligation and responsibility point of view, we are limited today in what we're able to provide. And so typically a call comes in, it's a mental health call. Unless there's a specific ask for ambulance or for fire, we most likely put this through to the police dispatcher, who will assign an available officer. Now, with certain departments, there is the possibility of identifying an officer resource that is specialized. We have heard about Car 87, Car 88, and that's an option. But those options are relatively few. And for the most part, we assign a general officer, and we have to rely on the training that the officers have received to handle the situation on site.
So recognizing, your contracts with different areas, could you give us an idea and just to kind of, to get my understanding and understanding that there are different contracts, different levels of service being offered to different areas. What would, if you don't have to identify the region by any means, but what would a minimum service contract look like that you provide service for versus a full delivery of service contract, if you could kind of explain.
Our contracts are very consistent because one of our objectives is to be a consolidated service center so that we can provide benefits of scale to the different departments, police, fire, and the 911 service that we provide. So there isn't much diversity today. The diversity in the services comes more from the history where certain agencies have asked us to do some additional things. So, for example, transcriptions. In some cases, we monitor the bait car that operates in some police jurisdictions, and there's a few other things like that. But for the most part, our service is not differentiated, and it's not specialized. It hasn't evolved. I was delighted to hear earlier from Chief Palmer about the extensive evolution that police service, certainly in the VPD, has undergone over many years. I have to be honest and tell you that our part of the emergency communication flow has not been able to undergo anywhere near that same evolution. And I think the opportunity is there to catch up and make a more valuable contribution, as I recommended the last time we were able to speak.
Yeah, and that nicely leads into my final question, Chair, if I might, is around the training of your personnel. Recognizing cultural diversity, anti-racism training that we see in many organizations, even the ability to recognize biases. What kind of training, if you could take a moment and explain the training that your personnel receive before they hit the phone lines in ECOM?
We do have diversity policies. We have specific policies on how to capture certain situations that arise, whether they are of a violent nature, of a crisis nature. And the policies that we use are written for us by the agencies. And on the emergency side types of calls from police agencies, as well as fire agencies, there's a lot of consistency. On the non-emergency calls, there's a lot of diversity. Certain communities like to have a more, call it, intimate service for their residents than certain other communities do. And a lot of that is driven by communities' bylaws and council expectations and other such policies. So our call takers and dispatchers are trained in those policies and the diversity of those policies that are given to us by the agencies. And then we also impart on them, a degree of common sense understanding of minority diversity, ethnic diversity in our communities. Our call takers and dispatchers do come from all walks of life. The chief earlier was referring to the visual appearance of, say, the cadet classes and how they really match the profile of the population. We're not far behind that, I would say. So there comes a natural element of that in our communications on the floor. But if you're asking me if we're in a position to provide 2021 level education of our call takers and dispatchers in the way that I think we all, including our staff, would like to see, the answer is no. And the reason is that for every hour that I pull a call taker off the floor right now, I lose yet more ability to get to those 911 calls, to answer those police emergency calls, and to help those ambulance services. And we are so tight at this time that we couldn't even think about doing that, unfortunately. But it is something that I personally consider necessary for the benefit of the public and the benefit of our staff.
So sorry, Chair, if I might just further on the same the same level. Excuse my ignorance on this subject here. Walk me through the steps of someone before they apply. What are there minimum requirements for an individual to apply? And then from the time they apply and get the handshake, yes, you have the job. What is that gap between, yes, you've been hired and now you're on the phones answering? Like, is it a week-long training? Is it a month-long training? What does that look like?
Yeah, I'll walk you through that. It is a little bit to unpack as well, so please bear with me. So the hiring process is a significant funnel process. We actually get a lot of applications. I don't know for this specific year, but historically we have around 3,000 to 5,000 applications for the 100 or so positions that we might post every year. The funnel gets very quickly withered down because we do look for certain criteria, experiences on the resume, even though technically the minimum bar is not that high. In practice, we're looking for people who have life experience, who bring diversity, who can speak to lived experiences of their own, whether they're negative or positive, in interaction with emergency services, who can bring that to the table. We're also looking for people who are resilient, who can learn, who can adapt. And in that respect, we're not all that different from our colleagues in the emergency responder services themselves. There is a multi-step interview process. There is I call it a tool service that we use for them to essentially demonstrate some of their quick thinking ability. One of the key skills is typing. Because all the information is communicated through the keyboard to officers as well as the radio. And as you listen to a caller, you type that information into the computer-aided dispatch system. So you actually have to be able to do that, and you have to be able to think on your feet. So once we give somebody the handshake to say, welcome on board, a 9 months process begins. And the 9 months process starts with first a week or so of familiarization with the very concepts of the organization and training to answer the 911 calls only. 911, do you need police, fire, ambulance for which city? And to learn the complexities of passing the call to the right agency. We have to pass that call to one of over 150 police destination points and hundreds of fire departments. So that's something to learn. And then we put those callers out on the floor and they do that job. They do what we call the 911 queue job under supervision from team leads and experienced staff for a period of time. Period of time varies depending on the nature of the individual, but typically is a number of weeks. After a number of weeks of that, we bring them back into the classroom and we train them on the call taking skills. And we have device classes for VPD, for RCMP, and for other municipal independent police departments. Because at this point, you get exposed to the diversity of policies. And VPD accounts for about half of our call volume asking for police. And so there is an initial base of training that we give people. And when we put them on the floor, they will initially only be exposed to VPD calls because that's all they have been trained for. There's some other people who initially only exposed to RCMP calls and to the calls for other independent police departments, such as Sandwich PD or New Westminster PD. That training in the classroom is, off the top of my head, 5 to 6 weeks. And so it's a fairly intense interaction experience with your instructor, after which you go back out on the floor. And at that point, you're going into what's called mentoring, which is the most critical phase of all, because now you need to put your classroom training into practice. And the way that works is that you have an experienced call taker who is what we call double plugged with you. So the call taker is listening in to all the dialogues going on. And depending on the proficiency of the new hire coming out of training, they're either asked to just simply watch that experienced call taker for a period of time, or we go straight into where the new hire actually answers the call and the experienced call taker is behind them. There's a very defined process of capabilities and competencies that the call takers need to show. The mentor is specially trained as well as a mentor, and they need to be able to validate that that individual is developing the capabilities and competencies in practice to answer those calls, to understand the diversities, to understand the protocols, to understand the sequence in which questions need to be answered, and then how they need to be entered into computer-aided dispatch so the dispatchers can relate them to the officers. That process can take typically 6 months until it's fully complete. Can be quicker, depends on the individual. Some people are more naturally inclined, of course, and we adjust it to the ability of the individual. And only when that process is complete, and only when your mentor and your team supervisor are satisfied, do you get signed off to be on your own answering calls on the floor. And even then, when you're on your own answering calls on the floor, you're put into a group of peers on your team who have more experience than you do, and you have a team lead and you have a supervisor, and there is still a lot of hand-holding to help you be successful as a call taker in that situation. So in a high-level sketch, that's how you become a call taker at ECOM for police call taking.
Thank you. From myself, Oliver, I wanted to ask about communications during disasters, and this straight away, it's away from the Police Act perhaps, but I recently was told that the radio systems on HF frequencies between 3 and 30 megahertz do not require line of sight communication devices and can, in a sense, call out of, say, a deep community in a deep valley that's remote. Otherwise, only a satellite phone would be their option if internet is down and phone lines are down during such a disaster as an earthquake. And the Forest Service used to use these frequencies to monitor wildfires. Now, there are people apparently who are proposing that these frequencies be available to remote communities in order to be able to call out. If they use a satellite phone, there's essentially one number that they can call into, so you would have a lot of different communities trying to figure out how to use a satellite phone, one thing, but also clogging up that line. So is there any option for HF radio within the organization?
I'm not an expert on radio frequencies and those technologies. We have those experts, so I could certainly have somebody get back to you with that specific question. But that said, we also provide the radio system for emergency operators and responders in the Lower Mainland. That's one of our services, one of our business lines. And police, fire, and ambulance across the Lower Mainland use that radio network. It is designed and as a technology and with frequency selected to operate largely in urban areas, because that's what we have in the Lower Mainland. And I can't speak to the radio systems that are provided by other entities in other parts of the province. What I can tell you is that there is a range of technology options that are either now available or that are emerging that can help improve the communication between the person in the emergency and the possible responders that can come to their aid. You may have seen recently that there is something called These Three Words, which is a technology that can be used through an app to pinpoint your location. But it requires you to have a radio signal, a wireless signal, a phone signal, and be able to communicate over an app. There are some other options. And there's a new backbone technology for 911 about to be deployed across Canada, notionally known as Next Generation 911. And I believe I spoke about that a little bit the last time I was here. It is my opinion that there is an opportunity to improve the communication and connectivity with emergency services across the province if we take a holistic view. And at the moment, those decisions are made very locally, and they are constrained by locally available understanding and knowledge and talent and funding. And I think we can do better as a province. And I think we can raise that discussion and the selection of the best technologies for the best circumstances in our very varied geographies to a new level if we tackle it more holistically at the provincial level.
Thank you. Go ahead, Corinne.
Thanks very much. And thank you, Oliver. Obviously, you will track whether something is police, fire, ambulance in terms of looking back at your stats and how, what percentage is which. Is there any way to kind of break that down a little bit further for determine how many of those calls are mental health related?
We can't really. And the reason is that even though we classify the calls on the basis of our understanding in the computer-aided dispatch database, the data is then the property of the police agency. And the police agency can provide those numbers. And as we know from dialogues, including with Chief Palmer earlier, certain agencies have a very deep understanding of how those calls break down. And so I would have to defer you to those agencies. I do understand that that's a little complex because every agency have their own data and varying levels of analytics capability. However, I do know that at the BCACP level, the BC Association of Chiefs of Police, there is a good understanding of how those calls break down.
Thank you. That's interesting. What we're trying to kind of think about is if there was that other option, police, fire, ambulance, mental health, we spoke about that before, if there was the ability to transfer to, say, a crisis center for some kind of mental health triage, I wonder how much of your time that would free up to focus on other things. But as you say, you can't answer that, but it's a question I'll consider to think about.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's difficult to answer, to sort of assume how much time would be freed up by that. For me, in those discussions, principally, this is a matter of emergency responder effectiveness, getting the right type of help in the right moment to the person in need. And as we know, and again heard from Chief Palmer earlier, certain jurisdictions are well advanced in that thinking and have a lot of on-the-ground ability to specialize the nature of their response. We heard about K87, we heard about the ACT teams and other such creations. Again, it's not necessarily holistic and consistent. And as you know from our previous conversations, I believe there is something that the Emergency Communication Service, and I'm speaking for ECOM in this, can contribute that would advance us in this even further.
Sorry, Doug, you were muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Gary.
Thank you, Chair. Oliver, I wonder if the domino effect of the ambulance service inability to patch over a call, or the delay in that, which to me speaks to your surge capacity as a unit. And in the Lower Mainland, at least, we're ripe for a natural disaster here on the Lower Mainland. So I'm wondering, what is your surge capacity? What is built into the system for those odd or rare occasions when we have a multiple fatality event or whatever?
Yeah.
Have you built in some surge capacity so that in an incident like that, we wouldn't have this kind of situation?
Yeah, very good question. Obviously, the situation with ambulance is unprecedented, both in terms of its magnitude of the call demand that the ambulance service has to deal with at this time, and the extent to which it continues. We do have other incidents that lead to significant spikes in demand. Windstorms are a good example. We last had a significant windstorm event, I think, in 2017, and before that in 2015, and they also lead to our services being flooded, and that tends to affect fire departments predominantly. And we have worked with our fire partners to have what we call a mass call waiting protocol when we adjust our processes, and we have a better handle on it. Our surge capacity is principally based on the people within our pool of operations. So we have 911 call takers, we have police call takers, we have fire call takers, we have dispatchers, we have training resources working at any given time. And what we can do and what we are doing right now is when moments become critical, we move people temporarily off one duty into another group duty because a lot of people are cross-trained. But what it does mean is then other activities go on hold. And a good example that I talked about earlier is when we have buildup of 911 queue wait times at the moment, and we do pull police non-emergency call takers to answer the 911 line. You know, I'll be blunt with you. I would not recommend making a non-emergency call at that time. The time to be served is just too extensive. So there is a limit to the search capacity. Now, could it be improved? Absolutely. It's a matter of scale, obviously. So, you know, for example, if we had integrated operation of all police emergency communication centers in the province, we would have a larger pool of people where we could make those shifting decisions. And if there were a major event in one location, you know, whether it's on the South Island or in the Lower Mainland with an earthquake or windstorm or other such events, it would give us access to more resources to surge to the part of the population that needs the help most urgently at that time. Again, it is one of our recommendations to this committee to elevate police dispatch authority from the municipal to the provincial level and support a single integrated provincial call taking and dispatch service, in part exactly for that reason.
Thank you. Go ahead, Rick.
Thank you, and thank you for the last time you were here bringing up the New Zealand model, where the whole idea of asking for police, fire, ambulance, mental health, you introduced us to that concept, and we are going to be following up with the New Zealand 911 team on that. So I look forward to that. I wish we could actually talk to you after we talk to them. We'll probably have some questions after we have that conversation. So just in anticipation of that, could you say a little bit about what do you think in terms of, I mean, I understand that, you know, in order to do something like this effectively, I guess what you're saying is, you know, you would have to make the whole 911 system at a provincial level in order to effectively do something like this. I wonder if you could say a bit more about what kind of changes would be needed to have our 911 accommodate, you know, asking for mental health assistance.
Well, I mean, certainly this kind of solution could be introduced in the way that we're structured today. And I do know that there are moves underway in selected jurisdictions to do exactly that. And where we do provide the police call taking and dispatch service, we participate in that with great eagerness. To me, this is a question of equity across the province and efficiency, cost efficiency as well, of the approach taken. So, you know, let's say that ECOM's police partners said, yes, we will do this. And we do create that kind of additional service. We couldn't introduce the choice at the 911 level because 911 comes in from any jurisdiction around British Columbia. So a mental health call would likely still go to the police call taker the first time in the first instance, as indeed it does in New Zealand. But now the policy would be adjusted for the police call taker to have the ability to push the call out to a psychiatric nurse, perhaps, and attempt to de-escalate the situation and, you know, then take next step action, which is, again, what's being done in New Zealand with some success. The problem would be that if in the scenario where we do this with our partners, it would then happen like this for Vancouver and Burnaby and Delta and Richmond, say, but it wouldn't happen in Coquitlam and in Surrey, and which isn't to say that they couldn't do their own thing along the same lines. But how do we make it consistent is the first question. How does a caller who lives in Surrey and works in Vancouver and has such an incident in Vancouver one day and in Surrey the next day have a consistent experience, knows what to do from the first time round, and receives the same standard of response? it becomes a lot more difficult because now we have all these different players that need to agree on policies and practices and put it all in place. And that's nothing to say for our remote and rural communities where the resourcing to make something like this happen is so much more challenging than it is in the densely populated metro areas that we have. And so to me, this is all about equity. How do we make sure that the people who need that kind of support, for whom it is a better life and health and emergency support experience, have that equitably across British Columbia? And to be quite clear, in my opinion, if we don't achieve that, it will again be our remote and rural communities. It will again be our Indigenous communities that will be left behind on this. And that whole process will be exacerbated in that inequity with the introduction of next generation 911, that technology overhaul that I was referring to. Because not only does it replace crumbling technology that we're suffering with today, but it does introduce a lot of new opportunity to route calls, to provide specialist service, to bring in culturally sensitive support. But it needs to be thought through, planned, and deployed. And if we don't do that at a provincial level, it will again vary from location to location. And again, I fear that the well-resourced coastal communities, urban communities, will be able to figure it out. But we will leave behind more of our rural and remote communities. And the digital gap, the digital divide and inequity in emergency communication will grow. And I worry about that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Your description of the 9-month process and all the varying levels of experience and guidance people receive before they're, in a sense, set out, not really on their own, but fully engaged, is a long process. And I can see how that would be so very difficult to shorten. And that makes this current situation very, very difficult to cope with. And so I really appreciate the efforts that you're making, and that everyone in this organization is facing a lot of pressure right now, and that's clear. We'd like to be of assistance to having that not be the case. I wonder if you can identify any regulatory or legislative obstacle that the Police Act or other acts create that unnecessarily make that process difficult. Is there any streamlining that could be made or improvement that could be made?
Well, it's a very fair question, of course. My short answer is yes, but I think it's less in the tweaking of a particular section of one act or the other, whether it's the Police Act or the BC Emergency Health Act. I think it's more to recognize the integrated nature of emergency communication and emergency response in any jurisdiction, and to look at the fragmented nature of the policy and decision-making around those things in British Columbia today because of the way it's just grown historically. The 911 service, in terms of its standards and practices and policies, is dictated by the regional districts. That's set out in statute. So we need to take instructions technically from 27 individual regional districts on how to go about answering and processing a 911 call. In practice, almost all of it funnels down through the Lower Mainland process because that's where we have an actual policy handbook. But you can see how making changes would be very difficult because you do have to go to all of these entities. We then have at ECOM alone 40 different fire agencies for who we dispatch and 33 different police agencies. And there are, of course, many more fire and police entities, agencies around the province that are driven by specific policies of their communities. Many of them haven't been looked at in many years. They're just there because they've been for many years. And so making positive change in a fragmented system like this, where key elements are provincially owned, such as the BC Ambulance Service, and other elements are municipally owned, and some elements are local government, are regional district owned, becomes very, very difficult. And I would say nigh impossible to move that, because you have to really look at the whole end-to-end flow of emergency communication. And that's in part of what we're seeing right now in the ambulance service. Our colleagues in ambulance don't stand alone. They're also connected into our hospital systems. They're connected into our GP and other healthcare parts of the healthcare system. We need to look at it holistically. in the fragmented level of governance and ownership of these services, it becomes very difficult because you have so many people technically to speak to, which is why we're also advocating the uplift of those policy areas to the provincial level. Establish a provincial level authority for 911 setting of policy and standards. Again, establish a provincial level call taking and dispatch authority for police. That's not taking opportunity away, that's not taking care away from any local community, that's not dictating to local communities how these things will be done. That's creating the opportunity to iron out all those historic disconnects and to put in place the things that will make a very positive difference for the whole of British Columbia. And that's why I'm very much an advocate of those processes.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate that answer and all the information you shared with us. I don't see any more questions. I know a couple of members have a very hard stop here at 11. And we were tardy in our appointment with you today. We apologize for that. And we're really very grateful that you were able to accommodate our time here and give us so much help. I hope members, if you have questions, we can forward them further questions, particularly after the other meetings that we might have, as was mentioned by Rick. But thank you very much, Oliver.
May I add one reflection?
Yes.
So I would like to add one point. I would like to speak to the people at 911 and for the people at 911, and not just ours, but for the ones that work at Surrey Police, the ones that work at BC Ambulance Service. I want to impress on this committee that our people in emergency communications are under the same strain that we heard earlier from Chief Palmer, his officers are under. And I will tell you that our people are at breaking point. And I will tell you that the need to reform the system that we're in and to make some changes to some of the funding, frankly, as well, is burning because our people are burning up. And I fear that we will lose so many of them. The system will fall apart even further if we don't address that. So for the sake of the public and for the sake of the first responders, the people who answer the phone and try and get help, we need to see change.
Thank you very much. Those are very important words. Thank you very much. We take that very seriously and take it to heart. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, members. We have a few people who have very hard deadline, so I think we won't have time for deliberation, but we'll look for an opportunity for an in-person meeting next week when we're in the House. If people have sort of convenient opportunity, hopefully, to get together, we'll work through Garn in the office to set that up. Anything else, Garn?
Nope, I don't think so.
Okay, then I think I would ask for a motion to adjourn from Deputy Chair Davies, seconded by Emily Kirkpatrick. All in favor and opposed? The meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.